Hey there, welcome to Steps to Faith Part 3. Now, just to quickly review, if you've gotten this far in the video and you've been in agreement so far, this is what's happened. First, you've decided that you believe in God with a brain instead of the only other alternative, which is God without a brain. The creation had to have a creator. The universe had to have an origin. Cosmology says there had to be a cause, a first cause. And that first cause either was intelligent or not. But even if it was not intelligent, many of the attributes that theologians have understood belong to God are ascribed by science to the Big Bang Theory or whatever theory you might listen to or hear. The attributes of being eternal and all-powerful and omnipresent are subscribed to matter within our universe, and those are all attributes of God. So it's either God with a brain or God without. And you've chosen to say, I believe in God with a brain. Step 2, you decided to believe in a God who speaks and is not mute versus one that is mute. You've decided that God, if he created us with intelligence and a built-in sort of sense of wanting to worship and know someone bigger and greater than us, and if he created love and relationships and allowed us to have that kind of a connection and made himself obvious in the creation all around us, it would make sense that he's at least probably going to be speaking in some way and shape and form. He wouldn't just go off and hide somewhere or watch us as some kind of weird biology experiment, unless, in fact, he wanted to relate and connect to us. You're at least open to the fact that that's a possibility. Step 3 is what I call Bible or Babble. You've got to make a decision on whether you want to accept that the Bible is, in fact, God's way of speaking, and you're going to do the homework necessary to prove that, or you're just going to accept Babble. When I say Babble, I mean everything else, and there is so much else out there, none of which, even secular scholars who don't necessarily believe the Bible was inspired, secular scholars would say that the Bible is unique among ancient documents, religious or secular documents. Unique in several ways. Unique in its historicity, unique in the manuscript evidence, meaning that the manuscripts are closer to the original author than most other ancient documents we have, whether it's the Gallic Wars or records of ancient Rome, whatever it might be. You've got to be able to do the homework necessary to say, hey, wow, this book is unique and different. But the reason I say it's Bible or Babble is that the other side of the coin is a bunch of crazy stuff. I mean, documents that were written hundreds of years later than the author claims to have written it, where he's faking or pretending to be someone, that wrote much earlier, or to be someone else completely under a different name. Documents that make claims that are just wild and crazy. Documents that tell followers to kill people who don't agree with them, such as the Quran, for example. You've got to choose between a document like the Bible and do the homework to see, is it really credible? Does it seem to be God's specific revelation to man? Or everything else? Am I going to syncretize some kind of a hodgepodge of faith from a bunch of other documents and philosophies that don't seem to have the same kind of historical or manuscript or scientific or archaeological support that the Bible has? Now, this sounds like a more complicated choice, and in some ways it is, but it's really not in one regard. You're deciding at this point in your journey to faith to either do the work necessary to prove whether or not the Bible is reliable and seems to be inspired by God, or it's not. It's really not that hard, and there are a lot of great tools out there. I mean, I'll mention 2 books quickly. One's called Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell. Josh is a guy who set out to prove that Christianity was crazy and that the Bible wasn't true, and came up with an entire encyclopedia of evidence to say that it is true. Over 20 years of ministry, I've said several times that if somebody would go through the effort to search through that book and look into the historical and scientific evidence to support the Bible and still come away a non-believer, that I would cover the cost of the book, and I would publicly announce that I had failed in terms of reaching that person. Well, in 20 years, I've never had that happen. But I will tell you what often does happen. People either go ahead and do the work and end up becoming a Christian, or they refuse to do the work. So that's why I say it's a choice. You can choose to do the homework, to look at a book like Evidence That Demands a Verdict, Or the other book I was going to mention is The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. Same thing. Lee tried to prove Christianity false, became a Christian, but gathered a bunch of great information in the meantime. You can do the work of reading books like that, Case for Christ, Evidence Demands a Verdict, whatever, or just doing your own research. Or you can just say, no, I'm not going to bother with the research. I just choose to believe the Bible's a myth and fables, and it's no different than any other religious book, whether it's the Quran or the writings of Buddha, the Book of Mormon, whatever. You could make the decision not to do the homework and just say you don't believe the Bible's it, and then create a syncretized hodgepodge, when I say babble, just a bunch of different things all together, spin them, and come out like one young man we talked to a few years ago who said he was a Satanist Buddhist. Crazy combination, but that worked for him. You could make that choice, but I challenge you to take the next step on the stone across the river to faith and choose to do the work to prove not only that God does speak, but that he has spoken. And not only in the general sense of creation, but in the specific sense of his revealed word in the Bible. And that he still speaks today through the Holy Spirit, using the Bible, and directly sometimes even speaking to his people. Supernatural. You could do the work to find that out, and I suggest and I challenge you to make that choice and take that step onto that stone across this river. Folks, when you look at the Bible, there is no question that it is different than any other book, and, frankly, that it's inspired and without error in its original manuscripts. And I say that as someone who studied it for years, but who didn't initially believe it, had questions about it, and wanted to prove it. And I can tell you that when you look at the archaeological evidence and you see that the names and places and kings and countries and nations that are mentioned in the Bible have archaeological and historical evidence to show you that they're real places, they're real people, they're real names, real dates. When you look at the evidence of the manuscripts and how close they were to the original author, when you look at the evidence of prophecy, you consider Isaiah 9:6, for example, that prophesies that Jesus would be called God, that the Messiah would be called God. And you consider that there are some 300 prophecies about specific details of Jesus' life that we know existed hundreds of years before Jesus, because we have manuscripts that we've dated as being written and copied hundreds of years before Christ, or at least dozens in the case of the copies. We know that, and we have all these prophecies, and we know that he fulfilled them in his life, because not only do we have the biblical record, but we have Jewish historians like Josephus, and we have Roman historians who wrote about Jesus' life and different aspects of it that validate that certain things happened just as they were prophesied hundreds of years before. When we look at all that evidence, guys, it's clear the Bible is unique, inspired, and it is God's way of communicating to us why he created us, who he is to begin with, and what it is that he plans for us in the future. But it's your choice. You can either just reject what I just said and say, the Bible's just a myth, it's fables, I'll just choose whatever, I'll make up something. Or you can do the work to show that historically, scientifically, rationally, from the standpoint of prophecy and spiritual fulfillment, the Bible really is unique. You can do that, and I would say to you, if you do that, you'll be taking the next step in faith, and the next video will definitely apply to you. Thanks for considering all this, and I'm praying for you that you will, in fact, take these steps and draw closer to God in the process. If you have questions, comments, concerns, you can contact us anytime at office@millpondchurch.org, through Facebook at Millpond Church, or by phone, 860-436-9216. God bless.